The text that we have before us today is in some ways a familiar text, but it touches on a number of very human kinds of things. And even the prayer of the day uses a very churchy word, a small word, that's very familiar to us. But as I reflected on the text more and heard from some colleagues across the country reflecting on the lessons for today, I think it's important for us to focus on a word that, particularly in our context, being the United States, is used in a funny fashion, and not how we as Lutheran Christians would use it, and I would argue not how Christians should use it. And the word is sin, S-I-N. In the United States, culturally speaking, sin is by definition something that someone else does. That's sin. Sin is something that somebody else does. It's not something that we do, and it's a doing thing, like drove too fast, cheated on my taxes, that kind of thing. That is sin. It's something that somebody else does. That's not the Christian understanding of sin. I'm not saying it's not the cultural understanding, because I would argue it is very much the cultural understanding of what sin is. When we talk about sin theologically and scripturally, one of the things that we're talking about, and maybe is an easier word to hear, is the idea of brokenness. We as human beings are broken. And just like you might drop china on your floor all day long, every piece doesn't break in quite the same way. The faults that we have, the stressors, the ways in which we fall short of the glory of God are as unique from one person to the next as the color of our eyes, our height, the color of our skin, the language we speak. But nonetheless, we are broken. Now, when we think about this, sometimes that can be in a physical, tangible sort of way. But it's not something that would be appropriate to ascribe the word sin to. So what did they do that this happened, right? We don't generally talk that way, except that we do talk that way. We will talk about that in the way in which we might drive past somebody who is homeless, or somebody that didn't have their act together such that they now don't have health insurance, and now look what happened to them. What did they do? What did they do such that they deserved this outcome? Well, maybe this will teach them something, right? As though we ourselves aren't broken, maybe not in the same way. But these become kind of excuses for us so that we don't need to assist or show empathy. But this brokenness can make it hard to move through life. Last night, we had the opportunity to have dinner with our son, Eli. He turned 26 yesterday. And we had dinner with him in his apartment in Monterey. There were many times growing up where such a vision was not something that we could have imagined. Our son has had 8 open heart procedures. I don't know anyone who's had half that many. 8. It's been 7 years since his last one, but we just got a clean bill for his 6-month checkup, which was kind of exciting, always something we celebrate. But in this idea of the burdens we bear, the challenges as we move through this life, sometimes they are physical. I was reminded when he was a kid, still of an age where he would be riding his bike to Palo to head to school after surgery, wondering how long it would take for the sternum to heal such that he could wear a backpack. It's like a thing, actually. But this weight, this challenge. Now, this isn't because Eli was evil or that his parents were evil and they sinned and so this happened. We don't believe that. But there are some ways in which we do judge in other circumstances, in ways in which Jesus never does. You never see Jesus in the Gospels going, Yeah. But did they take care of themselves? If she had exercised every day, would this have happened? If they had been at work, you never hear that kind of language. The language that goes on in the back of our heads as we seek to justify why we don't assist or why we don't feel sorry. Well, you know, if they had lived their lives a little differently, this wouldn't have happened. They'll learn from this. It'll be good for them, right? That's not the text that we have today. Now, in the text we have for today, we have this fairly straightforward story. We have this woman who is bent over by this life. Now, how many of us, on many days in our year, are not on some level bent over by this life, right? In this case, the text seems to suggest that it's a physical thing. But for many, it's not. For some, perhaps it is. But the backpacks of this life that we wander through, we go through phases where sometimes they are very light and sometimes they are bone-crushingly heavy, right? No matter how on top of our game we may feel, we lay awake at night worried about all of those things piling into those places that crush us down. The brokenness of this life, the brokenness of my life, the brokenness of your life. When this brokenness collides with one another, sometimes it makes even more fantastic brokenness in this world. So this woman does something grossly inappropriate. She shows up to the synagogue on the Sabbath day when no work is to be done, and Jesus sees her. Now, it's interesting to me because a couple of things. One, it's a woman showing up at a synagogue, which in Jesus' time and place, that was not the general way you did things, would have been very much frowned upon. She's bent over in a crowd. How easy would she have been to even be seen by Jesus? And yet, Jesus sees her. This is part of my sense in the Gospels, particularly in Luke, of Jesus deliberately seeking to be a pain to those around him. This woman has been bent over by this burden for 18 years, which is a nice, long, poetic way to say she would have been fine until tomorrow morning, right? You know, it's like Jesus could have said, I'm only in town today and tomorrow, but I am hitting Starbucks with the disciples at 6 tomorrow morning. If you meet me there, I'm happy to heal you quick on my way out of town. It'll be fine. No, that's not what Jesus says. Jesus reaches out to her, touches her. No. You don't do that. But except that Jesus does do that. And Jesus heals her. Now, Jesus, no sense of being subtle. There's a great sense in this text that's not spoken of Jesus saying, is everybody watching? Because I'm doing this today, right now, on the Sabbath, this is happening. Got it? Jesus is seeking to make a point that the brokenness of this world is not for us to explain away. It's not for us to say it only impacts our neighbor, or it only impacts people who deserve it because they've got it coming, because they didn't do this, that, or the other, or they did do this, that, or the other. But rather, we are called to show empathy first, and not second, not after the questions, to stop what we're doing in the moment, to reach out and help. Now, we often will come up with our own reasons. Well, maybe they don't need it. I shouldn't do that. Maybe they didn't deserve this. Maybe we have all kinds of narratives running in the back of our heads to excuse us from this kind of empathy and action. But Jesus is saying, no, you've got it all wrong. The last thing I wanted to mention is at the very end of this text. So Jesus heals this woman. She goes on her way, and they are all, and the word is rejoicing, rejoicing. The people following Jesus and crowding in on him often were not the top of society. They were often those most desperate who were seeking help of last resort, showing up, and when Jesus, the rabbi, steps aside from the other religious leaders, touches them, and heals them, bringing freedom and hope in that moment, they rejoice. And the image of rejoicing in here is the same language used when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. This sense of rejoicing on the other side. Freedom from a burden lifted. A sense of hope in life to come, when before, all that could be seen was the ground 2 feet in front of her because of the crushing burden she was carrying. So I would suggest that as we hear this text, we are being called not so much to ask questions, not so much to judge first, but rather to see how we might lighten the load of all those we run into. How can we move through life in a way that makes life for others easier? In small ways, maybe it's as simple as a door that's held open, or maybe in big ways. Maybe we're in a position to argue for the kind of health care benefits that employees have where we work. Who knows what the case might be? But we all, every day, in big and small ways, have opportunities to lighten the load. Amen.